Okay, so this is a, I have to say, a rather strange paper in a variety of different ways. What I'm going to give you is I'm going to give you copies of two different poetic implies. So, and you get to take them home, and if you want to read them, but that's in a different manner. But you do get to take them home, so I'm going to just pass them around. I'm not going to read the whole thing. And here's a...
Do you still want me to signal you? I think you should just give your paper and then we'll have some discussion.
You gotta signal so we can get food at the break.
You said it wasn't going to be longer than 40 minutes anyway, so I think I'd rather not interrupt you.
Okay.
Just let it flow.
Sorry.
There's another one going around, there's more than enough. Okay, so...
Thanks.
Oh, wait, there's more. Oh, no, this is more. Okay. You can tell by the form in your computers.
Okay, so let me start by just, before I get into the actual paper itself, let me start just by saying a few basic things about this paper. So first of all, for me, this is a rather strange paper, as you might guess from my introduction. Most of my papers are usually linguistic and quantitative and have very different characteristics from the paper I'm going to present today. The paper I'm going to present today actually is what's called an autoethnography. An autoethnography is a research method which is used where you look at your own personal experience and you use your personal experience to address questions which might be of interest to a wider scientific community. I'm hoping that my particular autoethnography, which deals with how to represent the Kindertransport, how to understand the Holocaust, will be relevant to you as an audience, and that's the aim actually of this paper. It's also a poetic autoethnography, which means that the data I'm going to use is poetic data. In other words, I'm going to present poetry. It's poetry I have written. So I guess in some ways this is more of a poetry reading than it is an academic paper. I did write a whole book though, trying to explain how poetry readings could be a research method. I read a whole book in order to make that point. I don't know how successful I was, but I did write the book. And this is actually a very personal paper and something I've been trying to contend with for, I'm 50 years old, so I think about 46 years since I can remember myself, in other words. The other thing I have to say about this is, I have a different title for this paper. I called it A Tale of Two Poems, in the sense that I'm going to deal with a poem that I wrote in 1987, which is a way off, and a poem I wrote about 3 months ago. And I think this paper is about the difference between those two poems, and I'm going to read both those two poems, and you actually have them, some part of them in front of you at the moment. So that's what you're in for. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Before I get into the poems itself, and I will be reading them to you, I did want to say something about, since this is an autoethnography, I did want to say something about my own sense of my own experience before I present these poems. And I very much like Nadine Fresco. She's a French psychoanalyst. It's a widely quoted paper, actually. Very much like a statement she made in relation to second-generation Holocaust experiences. And she wrote that these latter-day Jews, and she meant second generation or third generation, are like people who had a hand amputated that they never had. It is a phantom pain in which amnesia takes the place of memory. And I think that very much summarizes my own sense of this sort of experience. My father was in the Kindertransport. He chose, on purpose, not to speak about his experiences, and yet he grew up knowing that these experiences were always there. And it's a very strange sort of phenomenology as an experience. It's sort of like, as it's described here, it's like you have a pain for an amputated limb, but you never actually had that limb in the first place. And take that into consideration for a second, because what that leads you to is And I see a lot of my work that I'm going to present today as this attempt to address this amnesia and replace this amnesia with what I would consider to be a constructive memory. So the two poems I'm going to present deal with this attempt to reconstruct a memory in the place where, in actual fact, there is no memory, or at least no memory that I have, memory that my father has. And I also put at the top here a quote that you probably know from Eddie Weisel's The Fifth Son. I suffer from an event that I have not even experienced, and I think that's a very true statement for me as a person. So having said that, let me read you the first poem from 1987. Now, it's in the book, in the first book that you have in the meeting, but I'll read it to you, so you don't, it's more or less in the middle. Your face is multiplied, Xeroxed 100 times, in a different form, in a different order, and then stuffed into 10 different plain paper bags. I'm in this book of poetry, and I am on page
14.
40. Should I start again?
Yes, please
Yeah.
do.
Your face is multiplied, Xeroxed 100 times, in a different form, in a different order, and then stuffed into 10 different plain paper bags, unrecognizable. But I can still see you, with the red marks that I drew with crayon, and the yellow Star of David drawn by me in crayon. I couldn't help myself, the pictures being so youthful, so clean, so sterile. I wanted to know you, feel you, so I started to colour in with the red, yellow, black and blue crayons. Red, yellow, black and blue crayons. I highlighted your faces and gave you red lips. I put a blue line by the side of your nose and drew in a yellow star on your jacket. I blackened out your cheeks and took away your hair and tried to imagine you in a concentration camp. I filled in the white spaces with red and black to see you bruised and physically abused. I took away your jacket and gave you rough black stripes for a thin prison jacket, and I transformed you with crayons, red, yellow, black and blue, red, yellow, black and blue. So this is a poem about a sort of ritual, if you like. The ritual involves taking pictures of my grandparents. They were blown up passport photographs, and actually it's a sort of artistic attempt to try and understand and get close to a very, very difficult, a very frightening experience. I think the power of this poem is the use of sort of, on the one hand, childish means, crayons, red, yellow, black and blue, and the actual horror of the experience itself. And this is a poem which tried to make a connection between myself and my grandparents' experience in the absence of actually knowing what happened to them or hearing stories about them and those sort of family sort of communications. Let me tell you what's happened over the last year and how that changes my understanding of the poem I just read to you. So over the last year, my father, after 60-odd years, finally got the full Gestapo file on what happened to his parents. Up until that point, up until this year, my father didn't actually know what happened to his parents. And we found out that essentially they were deported to Riga and they were shot and murdered. So actually my grandparents weren't in a concentration camp. The poem I just read to you is an interesting poem. It's an attempt to reconstruct in relation to amnesia or lack of memory, a feeling or a closeness to my grandparents. But actually what we have here, and I put it up here, is the case of what's called cultural institutionalized memory. In other words, it's a memory constructed through archives, books, images, rituals, as I said, and acts of societal commemoration. In other words, I picked up